Hello again. I recently received one of these sort of nonsensical holding emails from the somebody who's claiming to be the investigating officer from Northumbria Police. Essentially another, I guess, waste of taxpayers' money in terms of the need to send something that says nothing in reality. And I've posted that into the description. I posted in my response. And what I've sort of highlighted in my response, I won't go through it in huge detail because, it's sort of, you can read it yourself, but I sort of remind them of the realities of the situation, where effectively, they force their way into my property on the basis of a pretext that didn't exist, accusing me of, amongst other things, vandalism that would have required a time machine. I was pressed by an officer in an interview trying to cajole me into confessing to something that wouldn't have even been possible. It's just quite extraordinary that this officer is still able to operate and hasn't been suspended. It's a gross abuse of his public office. I reminded her about the realities of Rachel Hudson's conduct, South Tyneside's conduct, the coordinated coercion I've received from various organisations, of which Northumbria Police are one, hence why they haven't responded to my questions. The two-tier policing, FCA said if you're worried about coordinated coercion, contact the police. I did speak to the police. They wouldn't get involved because obviously they're all part of the same instrument. Remember, Northumbria Police were the arresting authority with the FCA, or assisted the FCA in regards to wealth tech. I sort of again reminded them at the end that we're really not that into that. Their communication to us is only of value in terms of it identifies the lines of corruption. So not only does that, but we can also unpick the narrative, and it tells us where else we have to look. So inadvertently, they're telling us where we need to go without knowing they're doing it, essentially. And that has actually triggered a very bizarre email that I had a little earlier this afternoon. I will put that in a separate post, and then I'll do another video in how I respond to it. But do read it; it's quite extraordinary, and I think you'll realise why. And essentially, again, I made the point that all these things, corruption, authoritarianism, censorship, police state terror, degenerate conduct, rising levels of state indebtedness, and so on and so forth, they're all consistent with a state that's failing. And I don't say that lightly. And it's not just the UK. You can look at several countries under what we term the Western umbrella, and they are in a similar situation. But the UK is quite stark. Probably a more obvious example than some of its peers, but nevertheless, there's more than one country heading in the same direction. I've made the point that ultimately, what happens is a cost of capital. We make our research available on an open source basis. With if we can reconcile what partners want to do, make sure it's not out of line with what we're trying to achieve, and people make investments, decisions. They educate themselves. Sometimes it can be used in different cases, and so on and so forth. And it shows itself up in the cost of capital. The cost of capital is very, very important, because even if you look at, say, the French Revolution, for instance, it was a cost of capital issue that kind of triggered it. A state that couldn't function because it becomes so indebted and bloated and so on and so forth, it just couldn't borrow. couldn't finance itself. And then if you look at Napoleonic Wars, one of the reasons why Britain was able to win that war is it was able to bankroll other countries to do a lot of the fighting for it, and it was able to manage and raise capital a lot cheaper than France. So it's a very, very important if you look, because the cost of capital, when that gets out of control, that essentially is what triggers the change. It brings all these issues to head, and that's why I've made that point here. And going to, you'll notice in other videos I've made, I've focused on the idea that people know things are wrong, and people go along with it because it's the easiest thing to do. It happened at WealthTech, it happens in this child trading model, it happens at the FCA. We speak to people that are former and current there, and it's the same thing there. In terms of this conflict of interest that I've focused very heavily on, and how that leads to very bad outcomes for the financial system and the victims of financial scandals. So and it sustains itself by people being the practical man, as I've kind of used the Dostoevsky essay example from part 3, book 3 of the Idiot. And I also gave you a good example via Arthur Conan Doyle, The Crimes of the Congo, in terms of this line of denial that goes up and up and up and up and up. And in each of these cases that I've these aspects I raised in these videos, you see that same trend. But you have to rise above that, and you have to look at your conscience, and you have to look at what you believe is right and do that. And that is ultimately is more important, no matter what pressures you to go along with bad things and not challenge bad things. Answering your conscience is ultimately how it has to be, and until people do that, you will never get change. The evil that pervades these institutions that operate in our societies, it will never be defeated until people answer their conscience, and that's where you need faith. Hear a lot of people talking about Christianity and so on and so forth, but I don't want to frame it in a Christian nationalistic way, because again, I'm using Dostoevsky as an example. I'm not making any political statements here. I think him and Tolstoy were just so exceptional in what they did, and I'll give an example of another author that isn't Russian in a minute. And essentially what they said is, if you don't have faith, and it doesn't have to just be Christianity, arguably in Britain you've got other minority institutions that have been far more effective. They have engaged in their communities than Christianity has, and that's a lot of the problems I feel in Britain. Because if you lose that belief and faith, what fills the vacuum is almost becomes like nihilism, and that's really what I see in a lot of these Western societies, where you have these phony values that aren't values, and that's why we have this rot, corruption and degeneracy that we see. And incidentally, in Poland, if you look at social media, Poland's trends quite a lot because it's safe and prosperous and so on and so forth. And one of the reasons for that is they still have a strong base of faith. They haven't had this sort of loss of connection, and it's being filled with the sort of nihilistic, corrupt values that we see in other Western countries. Now, on to the other book. I'll close out, and I've dedicated it in the title of this video. So Victor Hugo, 93. You might know Victor Hugo better from Les Mis. Les Miserables, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. But this is, I think, is the last major novel, 93, and this is effectively the Reign of Terror, 1793. During the turbulent times of the French Revolution, and in particular, it covers a brutal sort of rebellion in Vendée, and you've got two members of a noble family, one on the Republican side, one on the Royalist side, that are effectively battling it out. And the Republican side, look at it that they have to destroy the Vendée uprising to secure the revolution. So you got sort of younger member on the Republican side trying to effectively capture and kill the older Marquis, who'd returned to try to restore the royalist structure from exile, and it ends up coming to head in like a castle, and there'd been atrocities on different sides and so on and so forth, and Younger got older, cornered in his castle, effectively historic hereditary castle, and he escapes. And he's escaping, but his sort of rebel army had sort of, in quite unpleasant terms, abducted some children, and they were being held as hostage, and they remained in this tower when it was on fire, and they were locked in a room. And Marquis sort of escapes, and he could escape, but he realised he's got the key, and he realised that duty is one thing to the cause, but conscience is the other. And he returned, and he sort of opened the door and rescued the children. So the three young children, they were reunited with their mother, but in the process he was captured, and and the younger in capture, well, assisting in his capture, which was scheduled to mean the guillotine, of course, goes through a sort of moral process in terms of what should I do, in terms of what's expected of me, what the process expects of me, but what does my conscience tell me? And I'm just going to read you a passage, and you might want to think about it in terms of all the videos that I've posted and how I've covered the Dostoevsky Practical Man, and also the issues raised by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in the Awful Crimes of the Congo. So effectively he's going through this moral dilemma, and I'll read the passage to you. And being able to prevent it, he would abstain, and he would be satisfied with this haughty dismissal. This no longer concerns you, and he would not tell himself that in such a case abdication is complicity. So i.e., even if he knows something is wrong, going along and say this is what I have to do is complicity. And this is in all the disclosures we're going to do with Northumbria Police, FCA, Child Trading Model, South Tyneside Council, Rachel Hudson, Family Court, whatever. This is the core of it. Complicity. And he would not realise that in such a colossal action, between the one who acts and the one who allows this action to happen, i.e. standing up, saying, I can't do anything about it, I have to follow the rules, the one who is the worst being the coward. So effectively, the one who stands back and says, it's my duty, I'm doing what I'm told, I'm doing what they've told me to do, even though that they know it's wrong. They are the cowards, and they are the people we have to defeat. And they are the people we will defeat. And I think a realization of that is you will see in the email that I received this afternoon that I'm going to put in a separate post. So read what I put in the description here, then read the subsequent email I got, and then I'll do another video sweeping it up. And finally, I covered this before, but something to ponder about. When states start to fail, people can see, yes, the two options. The one is you turn on the people. You use their own resources against them. You use terror to effectively terrorize your population, to subdue them into not complaining and exposing and so on. But the other is you pick fights abroad. You look at wars. You look for overseas enemies. Read the news and ponder that one. That's it for now. Take care.